Our top story tonight, Iraq's Saddam Hussein agrees to weapons inspections, but President Bush says he must do more to comply with UN resolutions.
Bill Clinton left Washington state after about 24 hours, but supporters say his message will linger much longer.
Dan Quayle remains on the Republican ticket, but the vice president is having a hard time accelerating his standing in the polls.
And Bellevue's Ellen Owen recovers from a dive in the standings. I'm Brendan McLaughlin.
I'm Lowery Matsukawa. King 5 News at midnight is next.
In a world that is witnessing so much change, one newscast has been changing right along with it. King 5, bringing you more in-depth coverage, more live reports, and more attention to the breaking stories that make a difference. Because whether across the sea or across the Sound, Western Washington or the world, the only thing certain is change. And the one thing you can be certain of is King 5 News.
Number 1 at 11, King 5 Television. And now, with all the news for Western Washington, Brendan McLaughlin and Lowery Matsukawa, with meteorologist John Miller and Carlos Del Valle Sports. This is King 5 News at 11.
Saddam Hussein backs down from a standoff with United Nations inspectors, but the friction between Iraq and allied nations is far from over. Our top story tonight, Iraq has dodged a possible military attack by UN forces.
Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein says UN weapons inspectors may enter the agricultural ministry, but President Bush says he must do more than that to comply with the United Nations treaty. While the United Nations told the world they'd found a compromise that would allow them to inspect for Iraqi nuclear weapons, Saddam Hussein was on Iraqi television telling his citizens that the mother of all battles isn't over yet. For 3 weeks, Iraqis frustrated UN attempts to inspect the agricultural ministry, even organizing demonstrations to keep the inspectors at bay. Finally, Iraq agreed to let the inspectors in, but only if none of them were Americans.
To my knowledge, the composition of the team, we are happy with it, and it's mainly from European countries that did not take any action against Iraq.
The UN negotiator admitted that Iraq only moved because of military threats from the West.
I'm afraid I have to say that it helped, because, as I said, it was difficult to get the seriousness through to the Iraqi leadership.
Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney says allowing the inspectors in is just a first step. There's much more Iraq has to do to comply with the peace treaty.
He has to agree not to use military force to suppress the Shia in the south. He has to participate in the UN-sponsored commission to resolve the boundary dispute between Iraq and Kuwait. He has to allow the UN refugees, humanitarian people, to continue to have unimpeded access to Iraq.
In Baghdad, reporters say citizens don't seem to be preparing for any military attack. Saddam Hussein remains firmly in control of the country, biding his time with the UN. President Bush warned Hussein that toying with the UN is not a good idea.
And while Saddam has bent to the will of the UN, the question remains whether after this delay a truly effective inspection of the ministry is still possible. The real test of his behavior will be in future UN inspections. Behavior along the lines we've just witnessed will not be tolerated.
The inspection is expected to take place on Tuesday. The inspectors come from Germany, Russia, Finland, Switzerland, and Sweden.
In other news, presidential hopeful Bill Clinton is in California tonight after a grueling two-day sweep of our state. He spoke to thousands at rallies in Spokane and Seattle on Saturday, but as King 5's Roberto Romero tells us, he ended his stay here a little more quietly with a visit to church.
Presidential hopeful Bill Clinton arrived a little late for services at Mount Zion Baptist Church, but church members didn't seem to mind the wait. Seattle Mayor Norm Rice quickly escorted Clinton inside when a single protester started yelling at the presidential candidate on his pro-choice views. Once the service ended, Clinton was back to the old routine, answering reporters' questions, this time about the sensitive situation in Iraq.
As far as I know right now, I support the actions of this country and this government. We've got to be very firm about this ceasefire agreement.
Members of the congregation swamped Clinton as he left, trying to shake his hand or get an autograph. Even those who didn't get a chance to meet him were still impressed.
I just got a glimpse of him, that's all I got. But hey, that was great. better than nothing.
It makes me really want to work harder to make him become the next president of the United States. And I really hope that the people in this country, and especially the people in the state of Washington, turn out in November and elect Bill Clinton president of the United States.
Clinton managed to get a jog in at Myrtle Edwards Park before heading to the airport to catch a flight to California. Washington was the first stop in Clinton's West Coast tour. Supporters are calling it a huge success because of the thousands of people he drew to his rallies to hear him speak. Now they say they hope he can keep the momentum going through November. In Seattle, Roberta Romero, King 5 News.
Clinton continues his West Coast swing with scheduled stops in California. Tomorrow he'll address the National Urban League convention in San Diego.
More signs that the Perot movement is losing steam. The Perot Information Center in Seattle has closed its doors tonight for good.
Over here, right?
The store's owner, 35-year-old Keith Singleton, says though he still supports the former presidential candidate, it's time to call it quits.
Not really a feeling of defeat, more than just being let down on when a guy had that much going. It was like going for the Super Bowl title and then getting to the playoffs and saying, okay, I'm going to take my ball and go home and not play.
Yeah, Singleton opened the center in May. Since then, more than 4,000 customers have wandered through the store. On its final day of operation, prices were slashed on everything. Buttons, sunglasses, T-shirts, even the yard signs were being given away for free. Yet even in the store's last hours, customers clung to the hope that the items they bought would not just fade into memorabilia.
Well, tell them where you are. I don't feel it's going to be in memory. You know, history is making itself right now. Things are happening. You don't know. From one minute to the next, you don't know. 1 week to the next.
So you're hoping Perot comes back?
He may. You don't know. He's that kind of guy. He'll figure a way.
Singleton says he has about $5,000 worth of merchandise left. He's a veteran fisherman. He says he's done with politics now. He plans to head up to Alaska and catch the rest of the fishing season.
Well, stock in Dan Quayle seems to be taking a dive lately, though President Bush appears to want him on the ticket this election year. The challenge is to convince the voters of that. Vice President Dan Quayle came to the Deep South to begin a counterattack against his critics and to end speculation about his future, insisting he will stay on the ticket. Quayle spoke to nearly 4,000 members of the Briarwood Presbyterian Church in an affluent suburb of Birmingham, Alabama, part of his conservative constituency.
Many of my critics tell me that I should never have raised the issue of values. Well, as usual, my critics are wrong.
The vice president is trying to quell the dump Quayle rumors, but they just won't go away. Even Alabama Republicans have said Mr. Bush would be better off without him. And the conservative Chicago Tribune, in an editorial today, called for him to step aside.
This is a closed issue. The only people that are bringing this up happen to be our opponents, the media, and some hand-wringers. The president has never wavered on this issue, privately or publicly, and we're going to win this campaign.
Do you think this issue will go away once your campaign starts moving?
This issue is a closed issue, past tense.
Mrs. Quayle doesn't really want to talk about it.
The only people they're talking about is members of the media. It seems to be the hot topic among members of the media and nobody else.
Then it was off to the races. Mr. Quayle was Grand Marshal of the Talladega, Alabama stock car race, the Die Hard 500. But Dan Quayle's real challenge is to rev up his popularity in the opinion polls. But so far, no one in the Bush-Quayle campaign has found a way to do that. Latest polls show Quayle is viewed unfavorably by 56% of the people polled. 45% say their opinion of him dropped during his time in office. Lori?
Brendan, a Democratic candidate for Washington's governor, pulled what some are calling a political stunt to upstage his opponent. Candidate Mike Lowery was staging his 11th annual shrimp feed and fundraiser in Capitol Hill. Just as Seattle Mayor Norm Rice offered his endorsement, this happened. The campaign of rival Joe King paid for an airplane to circle the Lowery fundraiser with the message, "Read the King Plan." The King Plan is Joe King's plans for the state.
Today, and then the main subject of conversation there is the King Plan. Everybody is talking about it. So I just wanted to thank Mike for gathering people together, and people are talking about this all over town.
If the Lowery backers were talking about the King Plan, it wasn't evident. Lowery points out that he has written a series of policy papers on everything from education to health care.
Well, the death toll is rising in Yugoslavia. When we come back, we'll update the situation in Sarajevo. and tell you what the survivors are doing.
And in health news, new technology helps doctors with prenatal care.
A Bellevue diver is back on top after a 6-year retirement with a secret weapon in her quest for Olympic gold. Northwest Hopefuls, Monday at 7 on Evening Magazine.
King 5 News, sponsored in part by Taos.
Mortar fire and artillery blasts continue to rock the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo tonight. 23 people have died in sporadic ethnic fighting over the last 24 hours as Serbian fire pounds the city. Meanwhile, 3 trainloads of Bosnian refugees have escaped the violence, arriving in Germany. Nearly 2.5 million people have fled what used to be Yugoslavia since it divided earlier this year. Germany is one of the last European countries still accepting Yugoslav refugees. German officials have accused other European nations of ignoring Yugoslavia's refugee problem. Japanese voters have once again endorsed the Liberal Democratic Party, which has dominated Japanese politics since the 1950s. The party carried 68 of the 126 seats up for re-election. Political observers say voters believe the Japanese economy is in bad shape, and with conditions like that, they trusted experience over potential. Only half the eligible voters cast ballots in the election. That's an all-time low.
A fiery bus crash in New Jersey tops our news briefs tonight. 5 people are dead and another 36 are hurt after a charter bus struck 2 cars, flipped over and burst into flames. Investigators believe brake failure may be responsible for this morning's accident. Many of the injured passengers were children from Brooklyn, New York, traveling to an amusement park in New Jersey. For the first time since his surgery 11 days ago, Pope John Paul II waved to well-wishers from his Rome hospital room today. The recuperating pontiff was visibly pale and thinner after an operation to remove a benign colon tumor. Before his appearance, a recording of the Pope's traditional Sunday prayer was broadcast to the crowd and on Vatican radio. He's expected to leave the hospital on Tuesday. Motown legend Mary Wells lost her long bout with larynx cancer today at a Southern California hospital. Wells is best known for her hit single My Guy, which sent her career soaring in the early 60s. Over the years, she co-wrote many of her songs with Smokey Robinson and toured with the Beatles. Mary Wells, dead at age 49.
Up to 4,000 people, New Age believers, converged in Sedona, Arizona over the weekend for the second Harmonic convergence. The small town is about 100 miles north of Phoenix. New Agers believe the energy of the cosmos is strongest where the pine forest meets the Red Rock Canyon walls. This weekend's gathering is small compared to one in 1987, where 150,000 people gathered to experience the convergence. In health news, should expectant mothers exercise? Some researchers say yes, but doctors at this week's American Heart Association conference in Chicago claim more study is needed. Most physicians think moderate exercise for healthy pregnant women does not pose any risk to the baby, especially if the women were active before conceiving. But more research is needed before doctors know if expectant mothers with ailments such as diabetes or hypertension should exercise.
Tracking pregnancies is getting easier due to new developments in ultrasound technology. Digital ultrasound equipment is giving doctors better pictures of the fetus, allowing mothers to improve their own prenatal care. Before Tiffany Tatum had her baby 3 weeks ago, doctors already had seen what the baby's heart, brain, and kidneys looked like. Looking deep into a baby while it's still inside the mother is made possible by digital ultrasound.
I'm going to check the blood flow through the head.
Doctors can check veins and arteries as well as vital organs. They can then analyze the data to help them decide, for example, how and when a baby should be delivered.
It allows us to make decisions about whether a baby is better off inside or better off outside or okay inside with therapy. And we're now projecting with more and more accuracy which of those 3 courses would be the most beneficial for a particular baby.
Tiffany Tatum's baby is alive today, in part because digital ultrasound detected a fall-off in blood flow through the umbilical cord at a critical time in the baby's development.
We had poor growth, poor amniotic fluid, and poor umbilical flow, and 2 preceding studies that said that the size was inappropriate. So with all that data, we could say with a high degree of confidence, this is clearly a baby that would be better off out than in.
I pray every night to the Lord and I tell him, thank you for even just letting me be able to have the baby. But just knowing the fact that he's here and he's healthy.
For more information on digital ultrasound technology, call area code 404-653-4824.
And there was only one surprise in the outcome of today's basketball matchup of the U.S. and Angola.
You bet. It wasn't the most lopsided win in history. Still, it was a no-contest kind of contest. Likely a sample of matchups to come. More later on King 5 Sports. But first, John Miller here, who doesn't really have a lot to do. There's no snow, no rain, no wind. It's just sort of perfect outside.
You got it. My advice to you would be to find your sunglasses and tune up the fans for this week's weather. Summer is coming back to the Sound. We'll tell you about that when we come back. Weather's next.